And welcome to our Thursday forum. This week we will talk about adversary simulation and SOC capabilities. We will see how each one of them will be able to improve the other. And I'm here today with Basile, our head of SOC at Post, former employee of Orange Cyber Defense in France, where he built their SOC. And he did the same for Post, but avoiding error of the past. Basile also performed some SOC audits during those time. And on my right side, I have Jean-Marie Bourbon, which is head of Cyberforce Offensive Security Team. He is performing pen testing and adversary simulation for almost 7 years. And Jean-Marie participated as a speaker in multiple offensive security events. And he is also active in social media. And I invite you to follow him and get intelligence on new offensive techniques and threats. We will discuss today and start with different service proposal we have associated to cyber offensive security and our SOC services. We will then discuss about real-life attack, and we will see how each of one prepare their services in order to build the attack and in order to build the defense. We will have a real-life presentation regarding a real scenario attack. And we will then go in deep with an attack scenario performed by the blue team, the red team, excuse me, and defense by the blue team, where we will see each one capabilities. And we will go over our conclusion, and we will keep about 15 minutes for question and answer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Antoine, for the introduction. So I'm Jean-Marie, in charge of the Offensive Security Service at Post. Just an overview on what we can provide. We provide everything in the offensive security area, from the classical, vulnerability assessment, pen test service, to red team exercise, purple teaming, or vulnerability research. So we cover almost everything in offensive security field.
Thank you, Jean-Marie. So on SOC part, so what is the SOC? Basically, Security Operations Center. It's about security monitoring. So what we provide to our customer and for Post also is to monitor all threat and security activity on your infrastructure using logs, using a sensor, using EDR to be able to detect threat and remediate to this threat.
We will now see the feedback from Battlefield, how each one of them will build their approach.
Yeah, it's a feedback from Battlefield in the sense that it's a feedback from an exercise we did for customer. Of course, we will not name this customer. And yeah, it's, the goal here is just to explain why we deliver this kind of exercise instead of just pen testing. It's because we simulate a targeted attack using well-known and used TTPs. TTP stands for Tactic, Techniques, and Procedure. And we will only focus on defined objective using a predefined attack vector. So it means that we don't have a scope, but it's based on the objective. As you know, attackers have an objective when they target a company. It's exactly the same here. And the goal will be to enhance your processes, your detection capabilities, the reaction, to be ready in case of something happen. It's something we saw, for example, with a recent campaign, or with SolarWind, for example. There is two kinds of person, those that are ready and know how to react, and the others.
So as Jean-Marie mentioned on the defensive part, so what we have to do is to prepare also on our side to be able to detect and to be ready. Yes, yes, you have to prepare to get the peace. You have to prepare the war. So on the SOC part, what we do is trying to start from business and compliance driver. The SOC is something that should focus on the main risk of a company, and starting from that, defining the tactical use case, so what kind of threat you can have, defining the logs you have to collect, and finishing by defining some rules on a SIEM system. So on the SOC part, we are using the Magma framework, which is a public framework you can find on the internet, to define all these rules. And this is something we share with our customers, so our customers know exactly what is in place in terms of SOC and in terms of detection. It's not a black box. It's really something that is well defined for the customer.
Do you have also offensive capabilities on SOC
yes,
side?
So yes, it's a crucial point. But to be able to defend and to detect attacks, you have to know how attackers do, and you have to empower the offensive capabilities of your SOC. So in my team, for example, there is some people with, they are not pen tester, obviously, pen testers are in Jean-Marie's team, but we work with Jean-Marie's team, yes, to be able to understand how attackers proceed.
Yeah,
it's a crucial point.
Yeah, it's very important to have some interaction between teams because this kind of exercise is just useless if there is no interaction between teams.
Yeah. During, for example, audit I do in company, it's a key point, but from time to time I have discussion, and the main difficulties for company was, okay, we have built a SIM, but we don't know what to do with the SIM. We have logs, but what kind of rules, how to detect, etc. And if you don't have offensive knowledge, it's clear that you are not able to create some really interesting use cases.
Okay, we will see now the scenario presentation.
Yeah, first of all, I want to introduce the real-life case we can encounter. So this is a document from Microsoft. You have the link just behind for those interested. Why we provide this kind of service is because attackers are evolved. And in 2021, you don't have to defend like 10 years ago. Things changed, the attacks changed, the mindset changed, and now it's not, for example, in the past, we had some opportunistic campaign where the payload was executed by the victim, but the victim was, for example, standard user, so it means that the ransomware was executed using low privilege, so the impact is not that important. From now, what we can see in real incident is that we have human-operated campaign where attackers will try to first find initial access, escalate privileges, and once they have the highest privilege in the infrastructure, they will drop the ransomware and execute the ransomware itself, the payload, with the highest privilege, where the impact is very, very important here. And of course, the goal is to ask people to pay. So if you lose everything, there is a lot of chance that you will decide to pay. So this is the goal here. But what is important here is that the attack vector can be phishing, can be unpatched weaknesses, can be a lot of things. What we often see is VPN access or things like that. We also see some VPN access without multiple factor authentication, for example. So it means that you can just do a basic phishing campaign, steal credential, and you can connect through the VPN, and then you can target the infrastructure. So it often happens. So phishing is a key attack vector. It's very important because what we can see in the IT security company is just user awareness. So this is cool, but what if one user executes the payload? This is the question, and this is why we provide this kind of exercise, because user awareness is good, but it's not enough. Otherwise, phishing campaign should not be the first attack vector all around the world.
Yes, indeed. I think with user awareness, we saw company, and we saw that without user awareness, about 20% of a user click. And with a good awareness and a recurring one, we can lower this level to 5 to 10%, but there are still users that will click, so you are still facing the same risk.
The point is how to react if it's happened.
Yes, it's a key point in terms of defense, and this is a good point raised by Jean-Marie. Yes, a lot of companies have a lot of tools, but when you do a real exercise, you see that they are not prepared to answer, and they don't know what to do if they are compromised. They want not to be compromised, but if they are, what to do. And it's a key point.
And this is where we can help with this kind of approach. The slide presented here is a real campaign that the goal was to execute the Ryuk ransomware. We have the TTPs in the middle in red for those that are aware about MITRE attack. You can see. So this is a campaign, the typical campaign we can propose to customer. But one more time, it depends on the real attack surface. For example, you have customers that have only one VPN VPN access exposed, and one Outlook, something like that. And you have companies that have tons of web application, whatever. Maybe you have some old PHP application, for example. You can have initial access easily like this. So for an attacker, it makes no sense to start phishing campaign that is a bit noisy and can be identified very, very fast. But in some cases, you can, for example, have, as I said before, VPN access without multi-factor authentication. So you can just steal credential and connect to access the infrastructure. Or you can have multi-factor authentication and a few attack surface. And in this case, you will try I will try. It works. you will send an email with just a link, and once people will click on the link, you will have, when we do that, we use a fingerprinting script, and depending on the browser, we will deliver this payload, or this payload. It depends. And the goal here is just to have initial access, and then we, as an attacker, you can see we try to extend privileges, do persistence in the system itself, and then we do lateral movement and so on. The goal is to reach the objective predefined with the customer.
Yeah, and Jean-Marie said it, and it's very important. The goal of the defense is obviously to block as soon as possible the attacker, but people doesn't have to forget that the main goal is to avoid the attacker to reach his objective. So there is some tools, for example, like EDR, which are designed to block the attack in the very early step, but the SOC is here not maybe for this early step, but to be able to block before the attacker reaches objective. And it's a key point because you are maybe not able to block it at the first step, but if you are able to detect afterwards and to block it before it reaches objective, basically the objective of the SOC is good.
Yeah, it's a kind of race, and it's quite difficult to defend because attacker can do faster.
They are not following the law.
Yeah, the point is just, we often have customers that say, yeah, but we saw you. That's okay, but what you did? No action? I don't care. You can see me, and then what's the point? If I go in a shop, I steal a TV, you know, if you see me to the camera, I can say hello, and just keep the TV with me. And so the point is, you see something, okay, how to react, and this is where we can enhance a bit the capabilities for our customer.
We have a live question that we can maybe handle right now. Paul is asking how many days are expected to deliver an adversary simulation.
Haha, that's very interesting. In general, we do that in 5 days plus 2 days for the reporting and project management. So it means 7 days with the complete exercise. Why 7 days? It's because our team have dedicated research and development time. So it means that all the payload, everything is ready before the test begins. So we don't want to ask to customer to pay them to do research and development. This is not the goal. And this is why we are ready and we continuously work on our payload and our initial access and so on. So yeah, we have a good roadmap for research and development stuff, for initial access and so on, because every product evolves and we have to be ready and to adapt our tool set. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So it's split in more or less 9 phases. Here we present the 3 most important, which is intelligence gathering. Okay, it's a kind of standard. We can have this kind of approach also during pen testing. But in the case here, it's very important because it's during this phase we will identify the attack surface and we will define the scenario we will use to target and to reach our objective. After this phase, we will have the attack. The attack means that we will have our initial access. Once we have initial access, the first point is not to escalate privileges, because what happens if I have access to only one machine, one workstation, for example, I try to escalate, I fail. What happens? The SOC will detect me, they will kill my connection, and I failed. So the goal is just to persist on the system and then try to find other system to compromise. And then after that, we will escalate using Bloodhound or things like that. We will target some specific stations, etc. Find some relationship in the Active Directory and so on. And after that, after the initial access, we will then do the post-exploitation. This is what I explained here with the privilege escalation, lateral movement, and finally the end is to reach our objectives. Objectives can differ depending on the business, of course.
We will now see the scenario, and we will see how the red team build each step of them, and how the blue team will be able to detect and which kind of action.
Yeah, it's an overview, of course, so no stress, it's not technical at all. Yeah, the phase 1 and 2 are mostly passive approach, so it means that at this point, there is no interaction with the target. It means that don't ask to SOC to detect the harvester or the employee collection on LinkedIn, whatever, because it's kind of difficult. The goal here is just to identify what is exposed, So the scan can be done using a basic Nmap, just scene scan, you know, using random user agent, using decoy also, which is an option in Nmap that can generate some random source IP address, whatever, to hide a bit and stay under the radar. There is tons of things to do. The goal is just to map, to have an overview of the attack surface and define if we will use, for example, phishing campaign, if we will use web application weakness, an unpatched system, whatever. So at this point, it's mostly passive approach. Yeah.
So on the defensive part and defensive point of view, yes, as mentioned Jean-Marie, so passive discovery is by definition, doesn't the SOC catch the trace, so LinkedIn doesn't send me an email when someone is trying to get your employee's email. For the active discovery, it's different, so you can detect Nmap scan, so it's quite easy to detect it on a firewall. The question is what you will do with this information. So public IP is very volatile, so the attacker will scan, for example, with an IP, but attack with another one. So how you can use this? How can you use this information to enforce your defense? It's a tricky question. Also, you can monitor these weak signals, but the attacker is controlling his own timing, and he will perform his information gathering the way and the timing he wants. So it's quite difficult to use. So the key point for me is to monitor your public exposure. So it's in every documentation about cybersecurity literature, you will see this, but it's really a key point to know what are your VPN exposed on the internet, what are your public web application public on the internet, etc. So you have to monitor this to be prepared and to say, okay, I know there is a vulnerability, for example, on a specific VPN product, but I have an exact view on how many devices I have with this product, and I can patch or monitor, for example, if I cannot patch because there is some 0 day and you cannot patch, but you are able to monitor cautiously these devices, for example, during a certain period of time. So. But by definition, discovery, you will not be able to block the attacker, or even to slow down, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, at this point. During the 3 and 4 phases, what we do is to prepare, for example, in this case, because it's feedback from an exercise, we prepared phishing campaign. To do that, we first, as you can see on the right part, we first fingerprint the email gateway, because in the normal company, you should have at least mail gateway. To fingerprint this, what we do is just we use a fake email address, send the email, and just collect the header in the reply. And we can see, for example, in this example, we can see that there is EZ product. Okay, so we know that there is a mail gateway. It's EZ product. Why not? And we prepare our scenario. Should we steal credential or not? Is it useful? Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it can be a bit suspicious. It depends on the maturity level of the target also, and how big is the company. Sometimes we split the phishing campaign in several parts. If there is, for example, 200 people in the company, we will target 100 people with a specific campaign and 100 with other campaign. Of course, we will use different domain for sending and for the connect back on the CNC. Of course, there is also something to do before this, which is part of the preparation, is to reclassify your domain. You know, because if your domain is not allowed to be accessed from the proxy or something like that in your target infrastructure, it's very important to first validate that your domain is well classified before. It can take 2 days, it depends on the editor. So it can be a good idea to first prepare your domain and have a list like this. And also to adapt this on your target. If, for example, it's a company in Luxembourg, you can use .lu, but if it's a company in Hong Kong, .lu can be a bit suspicious, for example. A lot of things like that.
So phase 3 and 4. So what I mentioned here is from the defense point of view, security gateway and user awareness are crucial. So security gateway, I mostly speak about phishing attack. As mentioned, Jean-Marie, there is plenty of means for the attacker to have initial access, but in the recent campaign, what we see is phishing campaign or as a weakness on, for example, VPN devices. So also you can use deception. It's not perfect. You will not block an attacker using deception, but yes, you can maybe slow down the attacker by using deception, not providing too much information about your email gateway, etc. So what the SOC can help you in this step is enhance incident response capabilities. So for phishing campaign, it's quite clear that when you send 100 of emails to a company, nowadays you will have one guy maybe who will raise a hand and say, okay, there is a strange email. And the crucial point is what you will do. There is some company where people raise a phishing campaign and nothing is done by the company. So for Jean-Marie, it's okay, you have seen my phishing campaigns, but if you don't take action, I can continue my job. So also you can you have to monitor obviously using vulnerability scanner, etc., your security gateway. So it's quite crucial for to cautiously monitor your, for example, your email gateway. And you can also use threat intelligence, etc. But as mentioned in the step 1 and 2, it's volatile. So you do not have only to focus on this information because it's quite easy for attacker to hide behind, for example, Luxembourgish IP. So if you have an attack and you came from China, maybe it's more you will detect it more easy that it is come from Luxembourg.
And if you have a customer that comes to you and say, okay, I have a phishing campaign, we detect it, or at SOC level, can you help him?
So we will identify, for example, all the email received by user. We will be able to take the link and verify on proxy server if someone has clicked, etc. So for this part, effectively, the SOC is not more in detection part, but it's more to help investigate and quickly identify who do what and to be able to block or to change password. So the SOC is not only detection, and it's a good point you raise, but it's also investigation. So you can have a weak signal, detect something, you don't know exactly the impact. So you have to now investigate in the logs to be able to qualify and say, okay, one user click or a ton of users click on the link, and it's different. The impact is different for the company clearly.
Okay.
So in the phase 5 and 6, here we are in the exploitation phase. So it means that we executed successfully our payload on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stations. It depends. Here, what is important also is that, as I said before, we do fingerprinting because, for example, you can use HTA payload. HTA is a file format that can permit to execute some script, and this script can execute whatever you want, PowerShell or something like that. People often think that they use AppLocker, so you can't execute PowerShell. This is false, one more time, because PowerShell is .NET based, and using C# you can execute PowerShell. So that's something we use because attackers can use this technique as well. So we also avoid to have attachment because we know that mail gateway like to check attachment, and you can have some file format that has blocked and so on. And there is also other idea I have in my mind, but I don't want to disclose this right now. It's still in a research and development project. So yeah, the goal here was to target only Internet Explorer because we saw that they used tons of Internet Explorer web browser in this specific case, in this company. So we used HTA payload delivery. And for the people that used Chrome, we redirected them to another exploit, which is a browser exploit. But as you know, with Chrome, there is automatic update. So if you are lucky, you have an outdated version, but it never worked. In this case, we successfully compromised several stations. So we had our initial access. So it's the payload delivery. Then we started to investigate a bit around what we have, what kind of application are used internally, etc., etc. So we found a way to gain access to another application, and then we start. Because we had administrative local admin access, we tried to access LSAS. We dumped the LSAS process, which is the process in charge of the authentication, to illustrate, and so on. So we escalate like this, and we had connection to our command and control server, which is C2. Command and control server is a server that is used by attacker to communicate with the target.
Let's move to. Okay, phase 5 and 6 for the SOC. So this stage can be spotted, but this is weak signal. For example, if I take the command and control connection, they will use, for example, HTTPS connection. And to be honest, if you are able to easily detect a suspicious HTTPS connection among all the HTTPS connection you have in a large company, you are a genius. So that is difficult to analyze. So for example, the print screen we show you, you have a means to be able to detect. For example, the print screen you see is a DNSCAT logs, so a rules detecting DNSCAT because DNSCAT is using a very specific format in a DNS request. So what you can do, okay, is use DNS, ECPM, HTTP detection, trying to find repetitive connections, suspicious connection, etc. You can also use, as I mentioned, a pattern to detect usage of known tools like DNSCAT, etc. that can be used by attacker. And also, and as it's a key point now regarding all the attack on VPN, etc., trying to detect credential usage based on localization. So if it's a point because, for example, for adversary simulation, they will connect from Luxembourg, so it may be more difficult to detect. But if someone connects on your VPN access from Russia, for China, Chile, I say every country, so okay, this can indicate, okay, there is something suspicious, even if it is not a perfect detection, but it can help to detect. But yes, for this phase, not so easy to detect, but you have weak signal, you have to monitor it, and as I mentioned before, you have to be able to investigate, because yes, weak signal is, okay, there is something strange, but you are not able to qualify it just with this. You have to investigate in the logs, and this is where the SOC is not only about detection, but also about having all the information you need to be able to analyze and qualify things that you can detect.
Okay, and did the Magma framework will help you on this? Because with the Magma framework, you will document everything you gather from a customer perspective, every kind of logs.
But yeah, the Magma framework link so detection to the MITRE attack framework, so you are able to imagine in which step you are. Okay, I see this rule that trigger, it can indicate, for example, we are in the exploitation phase. So,
okay. I guess it's the latest, yes, it's the latest phase. We maintain access, okay, in this case we use scheduled task, okay, it's a classical, but why not, it worked, to maintain our access, so we added a specific task to have session executed automatically, so it means that even if we lost the connection, we just had to wait 1 hour and just receive another beacon on Cobalt Strike. Using this access, we did some lateral movement that permits to escalate privileges by targeting some specific station, etc., etc. So it's a kind of loop because you do lateral movement, you escalate, you reuse this credential to target another system, and so on. The goal is to reach the objective, and the objective defined here with the customer was to access the domain admin privileges and see if it's possible, and how, of course. And once this objective was reached, we did a proof of concept of data exfiltration to see if something is detected or not, if it's possible or not, etc. And then we finalized everything. We collected all data and stopped at this point because the mission was successfully executed.
I think we have a question that we could take here that is related to this topic. From your experience and past mission, what is the percentage success of successful adversary simulation? And how do you determine if it's a success or not? Are you using some kind of flag?
The first point, the success rate, I would say is 100%, is 100%, because there is no kind of failure or success. I mean, if we can't reach the objective, it means that our target have good control, they take good action, because what is important is to react like a real attack. So it means that if you see something suspicious and in your process it's written you disconnect the station, just do it. Because the goal is to challenge like if you are under attack. If we are blocked, it means that, okay, they blocked them at this point, okay, they did something, blah, 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 they escalated, and then they were blocked this. Okay, next time maybe it's possible to go somewhere else, so is it possible to block early, etc. So it's still useful. It's still useful because it can permit to the SOC to develop new use cases, to anticipate and mitigate the risk a bit earlier every time. If we finished and successfully accomplished our mission, it's not a failure for the SOC, because the SOC cannot detect everything like this. They need to create dedicated use case, to adapt use case to the customer infrastructure, and for that, what you need to do is to simulate real-life attack. Otherwise, It makes no sense. So this is important and very, very important point. It's a key point that without any interaction between blue and red, it makes no sense to do this kind of test.
Okay. Okay. And regarding the flag, so
the flags are defined during the preparation meeting with the customer. We defined, for example, first the attack vector, because sometimes it's phishing, sometimes they don't care to assess phishing. So they say, okay, we want external perimeter, okay, but without phishing. Phishing is not allowed. Okay, why not? It can be also assume breach approach. So we assume that the VPN is compromised. What can happen? Because as Basil said before, when you have 0 day, you can't anticipate by design because it's 0 day. But you can do some simulation exercise based on post-compromise scenario and see what can happen, how it can be mitigated, etc., detected, etc. So it's very important. This is exactly what happened with SolarWind, for example. People that never do that and just focus on the perimeter, external perimeter, and externally exposed assets failed because they have absolutely no idea on how to mitigate the risk once it's internal. It's important to keep in mind that if I execute something on my station, the attacker is inside.
Thank you, Jean-Marie.
You're welcome.
So for the SOC, phase 7, 8, 9, clearly it's where the SOC has the main detection capabilities from my point of view. It's not an exhaustive list, it's just some example. You have to monitor operating system, for example, to detect PowerShell, PSXS, LSAS access, etc., which are very common techniques used by attacker and, as mentioned Jean-Marie, used by real-life attacker. So it's not about, okay, interception of email, which is something which is not, for example, used by attacker. So really, and it's really interesting to have this kind of exercise with the cost team because, yes, you are sure that it's real-life scenario and this is some threat and some attack you will face in your real life. So yeah, monitoring operating system is a crucial point. You can also detect, and this is exactly the case for example, what mentioned Jean-Marie in SolarWind, you have to monitor all internal detection, so of internal recognition, sorry. So if there is some account guessing inside the company, if there is some scan inside the company, so you don't have to focus exactly only on your perimeter protection, saying, okay, if I am inside the castle, I'm safe. No, you have to imagine your company like a castle where on each room in the castle, you have some detection and you have a way to say, okay, someone is inside the castle, but I can still see him and detect him. So internal scan, for example, it's quite easy to do, but it's a very important information, and it's really help us to detect some malicious activity.
I just want to add something for this, because I have the idea in my mind. Sometimes we have some discussion with customer, and there is a common mistake that is, okay, we do a pen test on, for example, web application or internal pen test during 3-4 days, and we want to see if the SOC can see something. This is a false approach. Yeah, thank you. This is not a good approach, at least, because when you do pen tests, people know that you are doing pen tests. You, for example, have whitelisting on the NAC, whatever, or you are whitelisted because the goal of the pen test is not to challenge the SOC. So it's very important to mention that because sometimes, and often it happens, they say, yeah, we did a pen test on our website and the SOC didn't detect nothing. So yeah, but that's normal, you know. We are whitelisted in the WAF, whitelisted in firewall. We have a legit account to access. You know that there is a pen test on this specific scope, but maybe this application is the new application based on recent framework, whatever, but just close to this application, you have a dirty, old application that is not maintained, and the risk is there, is not on this app. So yeah, it's a common mistake. We often heard, yeah, we did a pen test and the SOC saw nothing. Yes, because it's not the goal of a pen test.
Yeah, pen test is to test your infrastructure, not your SOC. And yes, last point I mentioned is the Canary Canaries. So usage of Canary is really powerful in terms of detection. So creating a fake user in Active Directory, etc. So yeah, and Jean-Marie can confirm. So it's quite simple, creating a fake user in your Active Directory and putting a hole to detect if there is someone trying to access information about this user. It's quite simple to deploy, but it's very efficient because, for example, if you use tools like Bluedown, etc., it's quite difficult for the attacker to know, okay, I don't have to look at at this specific account because it's a canary. So yeah, it's something simple to put in place, simple, not so difficult to put in place, but it's very, very efficient in terms of detection because yes, for the attacker, for example, he will know that you have a Defender from Microsoft on your laptop, so he will create all these payload to be able to bypass Defender, etc. So he will have information. For Canary token, it's really difficult for the attacker to know where are the canaries and not to submit information that would let alert trace on the SOC.
Yes, and you want to do it fast, so you don't have to say, yeah, maybe it's a canary, whatever. So you try, and then it can trigger an alert, and you can have more time to block the attacker.
Yeah, and after the canary, you have the alert with the canary, and it's a really crucial point. So SOC is not about detection, but also about investigation and qualification. You don't have a perfect SOC that say with just one logs, okay, this is an alert, this is malicious, and I can say that Jean-Marie Bourbon is trying to breach my company. No, you have something, you have a signal, you have something suspicious, you have something abnormal. You look at all the logs, all the alerts you have, and you are able to qualify and say, okay, I am really facing something suspicious on
You can have some sales that will try to sell you this kind of SOC, but don't accept. Sorry, no offense.
Okay.
And last point we want to mention is the usage of Sysmon. So it's something we are developing at Post. So we are using Sysmon on all Windows systems. So what you can see is, for example, here some rules during a real-life exercise that trigger using Sysmon. So just to mention that Sysmon is a very powerful tool in terms of detection on Windows system. It's open, so you can because, for example, you can say that Sysmon is redundant with some EDR system like Microsoft Defender, the one you want. But Microsoft Defender, Palo Alto Cortex, CrowdStrike are black box. So if the attacker knows the information about your EDR, he will be able to try to bypass it and to create specific payload to bypass it. For Sysmon, it's really different because it's an open format, so you are able to create your own rules, you are able to create your own signals, etc. So yeah, it's a very powerful tool to detect on Windows system, and as mentioned Jean-Marie, in many campaigns, the attackers try to become domain admin to be able to execute his payload on all the infrastructure. So Sysmon is a very powerful tool to detect attacks on Windows system, on Microsoft system, sorry.
I know we came to the conclusion, so it's important to understand that adversary simulation brings you a way to challenge your process, your employee awareness, because we saw for the phishing campaign that we will see the number of employee clicking and if there is too many of them. It also allows you to assess your technical control. Is your EDR an effective solution? Is it configured accurately? Do you have all log expected? Because those logs will be then used by the SOC, to monitor intelligence that are catched from your architecture.
Yeah, and just a remark, yes, it's a key point because adversary simulation can let you see that, okay, my SOC doesn't detect, but my SOC doesn't have logs. So we are like policemen in a crime. If you don't have access to the room, you are not able to see.
But this is also the goal, to see what you need. Yeah.
But it should be part of the analysis, and this is why it's very interesting to have this kind of exercise. And as mentioned, Jean-Marie, if you do offensive exercise and without no link, without offensive team and defensive team, basically you are wasting your time. But but if you do things good and you are very good feedback and you have exercise where the two teams are involved, you are able to detect, okay, the attacker breached this, but the SOC has no information, no log, so maybe I have to add a sensor, maybe I have to add some new devices, maybe I have to collect some new logs and create new rules, etc. So this is a key point, but the SOC can see only the information he has in his team.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, and we can see also that the SOC will challenge the adversary simulation because when you perform an adversary simulation and there is a SOC in front of you, I guess the exercise is a little bit more challenging because you have a fair chance to be detected.
Yeah. We as I said, we have a R&D roadmap and so on, and we prepare payload also to bypass SOC detection and so on. Yeah, it's a bit more challenging, and since we have some customers that do this kind of simulation in a regular basis, it permits also to increase the detection level, and for us, It enforces the team to create new payload, new bypass, and it requires more time also to escalate privileges. And we see it's very efficient because it's based on your real exposure to the risk and not on a scope that is provided to assess a specific part of your infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a point we mentioned here because indeed, with this kind of exercise, you will demonstrate proven risk and real life risk, meaning that you can invest on mitigating those risks and not invest into the wild and say, okay, I will try to defend everything as I can. No, you will have targeted investment and you will have real risk reduction.
And we see since year we can see tons of companies that are selling pen tests. So sometimes it's kind of pen test, which is Nessus scan and some basic tests like this. It's not pen test. And even when you do specific pen test or whatever, it's something that is done since years now. But as we can see, ransomware campaigns are still increasing. So it means that there is something wrong somewhere, because we focus on specific application instead of the real exposure. This is why we propose this approach.
Yeah, for example, you see a lot of people wasting their time about SSL version and their certificate, etc. We discussed this with Jean-Marie. There is not so many attacks using your SSL certificate.
No.
You should more focus, for example, on basically how you will react in terms of phishing campaign. Are you prepared and are you able, when someone raises a hand saying, okay, I receive a strange email, and unfortunately, I click on the link. So you have more to invest your money in this kind of scenario than to trying to patch all your server to avoid any SSL problem, cipher that are not used in a real life attack. So this is why it's very interesting to have this kind of exercise, because it's real life, it's really what you fear and what you have to fear, and not literature, I would say, literature scenario.
And you cover several points, which is detection, process, awareness, everything, in few days, where with the same pool of days for a pen test, you will cover only one application, for example. So.
Yeah. For example, there is some BGP attack, redirection BGP attack, but if you are a short company, maybe you don't have to fear about BGP redirection on your public IPs.
For example.
So you should more, for example, enhance your mail gateways than trying to invest money in a hypothetical attack raised by the state.
And on the SOC side, we've seen that the important is to catch the weak signal and be enabled with threat intelligence in order to do threat hunting and be able to assess if it's a real attack or if it's false positive. And one of the points of the SOC, it's also that you will have better usage of all your tooling, because like you said, if you have all the tools in place, but no one is looking when someone successfully bypasses one of them, at the end, it's not as much effective that if someone is able to look into it and try to see if it's a real-life attack or not.
Yeah, and it's a key point, but for me, a SOC is about tooling, but also about human people that are behind. So as mentioned, tools are there is plenty of marvelous tools you can use, but you will not replace, and I think it's the same for offensive stuff. So you see now intelligence artificial tools able to do some offensive tests, but from my point of view, for the moment, you have plenty of tools, and it's like a hammer. You can kill someone, or you can break your finger. It depends how you use it. So for security tools, it's the same. You need people to use it, and the knowledge of the people who use it makes a difference. So there is plenty of tools that do nothing if you don't have people to use it correctly.
Yeah. And we have a question on this point. Someone is asking what kind of SOC certification do you think an analyst, SOC analyst should have?
For me, it's a SANS certification. I don't have any action at SANS, but SANS certification are very good. And the feedback from my team, it's from engineer and from very technical guys. They really like SANS training because it's really technical. It's not just literature training. It's real life training, analyzing traces, etc. So yeah.
Okay.
But I have no money if you take a SANS certification. If someone of the SANS is in the room.
Okay, so we will continue with a question. Jean-Marie, what do you think when a customer told you that he has a SOC in place and asks you to provide adversary simulation activities? Do you think SOC will help him and increase your challenge?
maybe, I don't know. In case I know there is a SOC, I will discuss with the team, and the guys that will do the exercise will keep in mind there is a SOC and will be a bit more stealthy than a classical, I would say, approach. But for me, the first exercise, the SOC will detect few things, and even if it detects in major cases, it's too late. The goal is, after this exercise, discuss with the SOC team, develop use cases, and then maybe plan another test later, because this is where the SOC will develop specific use cases, will collect the good logs to create working rules, useful rules. And then if we do the exercise next time, we should see the difference, yes.
And would you change the approach, meaning that we discussed a bit at the beginning of the time for this kind of exercise, and you mentioned that 7 days
yes.
It's the expected time.
It's the same if there is a SOC. It's not a problem. We just use more stealthy payload. We have a lot of payload in our office, I would say, in our lab, and we will just. There is some payload we don't want to burn during some exercise where we target a small company that have a VPN access without any double factor, or an old school PHP application, and you know that you can breach the company easily. We don't want to burn very advanced payload, but if we need, if we know that there is a SOC, where there is a blue team, and maybe they have different maturity level, we will use other payload and maybe be a bit more precautious here.
So we have a question, I will translate it. So the person asked and said that the attacks are different by nature, as you mentioned, and as you explain, based on the weaknesses you will find, we cannot invest into the wild, as we said earlier, and say, okay, we will invest on all type of attack, and we will not target our investment in terms of risk management. But how do you know that the control you put in place are effective enough for the next intrusion test? Do you think it's better, and I ask both of you, to target your control on some framework like CIS, for example?
For me, frameworks are good to start. It's my point of view, but yeah, I'm a really big fan of a real life scenario, because the problem is the attacker doesn't follow framework. The attacker doesn't attack you saying, okay, it's ISO 27001, I will proceed like this. No, attacker will attack, will use all the capabilities, will use social engineering, will use plenty of tricks to pawn you. So okay, you can follow framework, you can test your security controls, but do not focus too much on literature and on best practices. Yes, do real life scenario, do perform as attacker will do in the real life, and yeah, for me, this kind of exercises are really useful due to this real life approach.
If I may, as I was a former Chief Information Security Officer, I would say that the CIS provide you with the standard guideline. You will follow CIS in order to implement the basic of your control, and it will give you a nice cover regarding all kind of risk on all your architectures. It will give you the first layer in terms of security. And adversary simulation will give you some real-life exercise, indeed, and it will allow you to invest on what are real facing risks. Because you really deploy something that looks like an attacker will do. So when you perform your exercise, when it's a success and you reach the goal, you know that you have to invest on specific control. Indeed, this investment will be replicated, but it's an increasing scenario, meaning that you can run it every year. Of course, even us, we advise you to change your provider, because it's important to have different technique, to have different mindset, because it's all about competencies of the people and skills of the people that will do the assessments. So change the provider, even as we advise our customer to do this. And doing this year over year, you will increase your security and it will allow you to build something that is really resilient.
The threats also evolve. Keep this in mind, because it can be true today, but the situation can be totally different in 1 year, you know? So.
Yeah, and to complete, yes, for me, challenging your security control, I say yes, is more about security assessment.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
You will do that for a security assessment. It's important to see, okay, are my windows well hardened, are my system well hardened, etc. What is interesting in adversary simulation or adversary emulation is really more to focus on your process and how you work, how you are able to investigate. It's not saying, okay, on my Active Directory, I have this parameter, etc. You don't need adversary simulation to do that. You can just do vulnerability assessment and you'll be able to correct your control. No, it's really more about processes, reaction, capabilities of investigation, and how you can stop it, how you can qualify quickly incidents.
Yeah, this is where we can bring added value.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this is just following a checklist or something like that. It makes no sense.
On GitHub, you have plenty of scripts that you can run on your Active Directory just to check your security CS controls. And you don't need an adversary simulation to do that. So it's a different stuff for me.
There is a question I will take, I think. So someone is asking what I should do if I don't have SOC and I have one of my computer compromised. So we have one member that is not here today, which is the incident response team.
Yeah.
So the incident response team, their objective is to dig into an incident and discover what kind of trace and what kind of action had been done. So they will analyze all the intelligence that had been left by the attacker, and they will trace back in order to discover if he was able to exfiltrate data, if he was able to have a command and control, if he compromised other computer than the first one you've seen, and assess the complete incident, help you to recover to the incident from this incident, and help you to eventually have the right report for example, the CSSF or other regulators.
Yeah, to give a practical answer, yeah, just call the post CCIRT and afterwards call your sales representative supposed to buy a SOC service.
But there is a good news in this question. It's because it supposes that you know that you are compromised.
Yeah.
That's still a good news.
Yes, and then one of the key points also is to explain that the SOC will bring you with intelligence in order to accelerate the process. Without the SOC, all the threat hunting that will be done by the CSIRT, the incident response team, will have to be done on each computer one by one. With the SOC, they will come with a lot of intelligence based on the centralization of information that is provided by the SOC.
Yeah, and also on this system, because the logs are sent in real time, for example, if you go on a compromised laptop, I would say 1 day, 2 days, 3 days after an attack, a successful attack, maybe the logs are no more present. SOC help you to investigate afterwards because all the logs are on the SIS system. It's really difficult for the attacker to compromise the SIM system because normally there is no direct connection from the company to the SIM system. So yeah, it will help the CSIRT or the different team to investigate and to qualify, and also it lets the trace accessible. If you have no SIM system, maybe your disks are full and there is log rotation and you lost basically your logs, or the attacker was able to delete his traces. So.
Jean-Marie, we have quite a lot of questions today, so it's nice.
That's
Feel
cool.
free to ask. So one of the questions is, what is the difference between adversary simulation and adversary emulation?
Aha, the good question. So the adversary simulation is what we explain. So I don't want to explain everything, but there is objective, there is predefined attack vector, and then we execute the test. On emulation, we will take, for example, a specific campaign with some specific TTPs, and we'll follow step by step all the TTPs in the infrastructure. So it's focused on one campaign. And for example, when we execute simulation, if we are blocked somewhere, we can find a bypass and then continue, whatever. When we do emulation, we will follow exactly the steps for a specific campaign, and that's it. So it means that if there is a control that blocked the TTP, at one point, we will say, okay, so we know that at this point the control is okay. We will go one step further, etc., etc. And at the end, we will have a report saying, okay, for this campaign, you are exposed or you are not exposed because of this TTP, blah, blah, blah. And it's very different. For the simulation, we use attack vector objective. For the emulation, we'll take a predefined scenario which is focused on one campaign and just try to reproduce each step.
And I think we have one last question for Basil, and I would have covered every one of them, I guess. I will check afterwards. Basil, how many scenarios do we implement for our customers? If we're talking about a standard customer, because it's quite a tricky question.
I don't like to give this kind of figure because there is a lot of SOC when I start my career that say, okay, we have 100 rules, you have thousands of rules, we are a billion of rules. So it's not, but yeah, basically, and we use different techniques. So there is some rules that trigger some alerts. There is some rules that are more to keep some signal, but to be able to analyze things if we detect something other. So, but if there are of rules on the SIM system, it will be between 100 and 200 rules, depending of the size of the company, and depending also, it's depend a lot of what we collect. If we only collect firewall logs, for example, if you want to build a SOC with firewall logs, don't expect to be able to detect plenty of things. You have a source port, destination port, source address, destination address. So it also depends on the scope of what you collect. If you have plenty of applications, plenty of different systems, etc. I have worked, for example, when I was working for Range with a very industrial company, and we have IoT systems. So there was plenty of rules linked to this very specific business of the company. So I would say on a typical IT infrastructure, so Active Directory, antivirus, Windows, firewall, etc., you will have between 100 and 200 rules. But don't focus on the numbers because you can split the rules to increase the number artificially, and it doesn't mean that you have a better SOC.
Yeah, because most of the rules will be generic, for example, and
It's like threat intelligence, you know. I remember when I do some tests on a threat intelligence system, the vendor say, okay, we have the biggest database of bad IPs, bad URLs, etc. But what we observe is if the database is too high, there was too many false positives. So you have to focus on quality more than on the numbers.
We have a last question coming in, so it's an interesting one. As you have a lot of experience with adversarial attacks, you probably have many lessons learned from your clients. Can we imagine as a preliminary step to put in place, preliminary, excuse me, it's quite hard to say, check that you could put in place and say, okay, based on the lesson learned, you should at least have this in place in order to make it more difficult.
Yes.
And maybe we can
100%.
use the left time in order to...
The most efficient for me right now is not the EDR, is not the antivirus, it's not the firewall, it's not everything, the mail gateway. The most efficient right now is a good proxy. It's underrated, but it's the best mitigation. If you have proxy with authentication and you have some detection rule, for example, based on user agent or something like that, it's quick win, but it's very efficient.
And I think we're talking about real authentication
yes,
because
of course.
if it's single sign-on, you can replay it more easily. And it's less
because there is
efficient.
different level of authentication, but if you have a good authentication in place, it's a nightmare for attacker because what you have to keep in mind is that when you want to connect to your CNC, you want to do the connect back, your payload have to authenticate itself to the proxy before connecting to the CNC, and it's very challenging.
Okay, so it's
we have something working for that, of course, but it's something that will, it's more challenging, and it will block a tons of generic payload or something like that. Yes.
And again, maybe it will help the SOC because they will see those payload blocked, and they will use those logs in order to.
But you know, even just based on, even if you don't have authentication, well, it should be better with, but even if you don't have, just adding a rule that detects based on user agent is very, very efficient. Because if you have empty user agent or PowerShell user agent that try to connect to the internet, that's suspicious.
And we have I hope, those kind of rules.
Yeah. We are supervising proxy, yes, because we know that attacker will try to connect back to their CNC.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, it's not so easy. Detecting HTTPS traffic among HTTPS traffic is not an easy stuff. So you have to focus, yes, on the proxy. If you see, so for example, failed authentication, things like that, a laptop that suddenly try to go out and doesn't succeed, it can indicate, okay, it's a type of signals you can have and investigate for sure, but you can have to detect something suspicious inside the company.
Okay, I think we will use our last minute in order to thank everyone for participating today to this Thursday forum. We have been happy to see that we had a lot of questions. It means that the subject had been interesting, I think, and I hope. Feel free to reach out with us if you have any more questions. You can contact your account manager or you can contact us directly. And we have been happy to spend this time with you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.